I'm hanging 120 feet over the ruins of old Coventry Cathedral and enjoying the view of its replacement, a building which stood for a post-war age of optimism and architectural invention.
This is Climbing Great Buildings, and throughout this series I'll be scaling our most iconic and best-loved structures, from the Normans to the present day.
Way.
I'll be revealing the building's secrets and telling the story of how British architecture and construction developed over 1,000 years. The next step in my journey through the evolution of British architecture brings me to Coventry. The new cathedral, designed by Sir Basil Spence and built from 1955, sits alongside the bombed ruins of the original medieval church. The new cathedral became a symbol of a nation rising from the rubble and ashes after the hellish devastation of the Second World War. I've been given unprecedented access to reveal the secrets behind Coventry Cathedral's construction. I'll zip from the old bell tower to tell the story of the cathedral's resurrection and reveal why the bombed building was neither rebuilt nor bulldozed to make way for a replacement.
I think it's great that they left it here, actually.
I'll scale a tapestry the size of a tennis court to come face to face with the most incredible rendition of Christ, crafted from over 1,000 different shades of wool.
Looms in every sense, I think.
And along the way I'll find out how a trip to the dentist inspired the design of this modern masterpiece. As ever, top British climber Lucy Creamer and a team of riggers, along with intrepid cameraman Ian Burton, will be joining me on my vertical adventure. Coventry Cathedral is in fact two cathedrals. There's the new cathedral over there, but this is all that remains of the old cathedral, St Michael's, a parish church built into the first quarter of the 15th century, one of the masterpieces of late medieval architecture in Britain. It was elevated to cathedral status in 1918, just 22 years before one fateful night changed the face of the city. On the 14th of November 1940, 40,000 incendiary bombs rained down on Coventry, killing over 600 people. This beautiful medieval city was engulfed in a raging firestorm that left barely a building untouched. Over a third of the city was destroyed, but when the shell-shocked people of Coventry emerged the next morning, they heard the bells of the cathedral ringing. Jubilation quickly turned to despair when they realized the main body of the cathedral had been reduced to rubble. All that remained was the nave walls and its beautiful bell tower. The decision to build a new cathedral was led by Provost Howard the very next morning. Now, this wasn't to be an act of defiance or revenge, but rather peace and reconciliation and hope for the future. And nothing symbolized that message of hope more than a visit from a young Queen Elizabeth, the fresh face of a nation still struggling to emerge from the destruction and grief of war.
Coventry, paying her first visit to the city since her coronation to lay the foundation stone of the new cathedral, the Queen, accompanied by the Duke of Edinburgh, saw the cross of nails which was recovered from the charred timbers of the old building.
The rebuilding of the cathedral was a statement to the world that for all the horror and pain that Britain had endured, a new confident country was emerging braver, stronger, and more resolute than ever. The finest craftsmen of the age would use their skills not only to create a monument of hope, but also to reflect the virtues of a new Britain. They would be bold, daring, and unbeholden to the past. In order to view the old cathedral, I'm going to zip-line 180 feet down from its steeple. Normally, I'd be admiring the cathedral's wonderful arcades and timber roofs, but sadly, all that remains is a shell. But from this vantage point, I can get a real sense of what the city would have looked like before that fateful night in 1940.
We're on a site of a gem of a medieval city. Look down there, see that timber frame courtyard?
Yeah.
It's one of the relics of the medieval city. It was packed with narrow lanes, half-timbered houses. If Coventry were today what it was like in 1939,
yeah,
it would be one of the chief tourist attractions in the whole of Britain. It would be a jewel in Britain.
It's tragic, isn't it?
Completely tragic.
Built over the course of more than 100 years in the 14th and 15th centuries, St Michael's was a fine example of late Gothic church architecture.
Let's do this thing.
glorious.
Quite genteel, isn't
Now.
it?
When the decision was made to rebuild the cathedral, the church authorities were adamant that the iconic bell tower must remain standing.
Wow.
Now let's take stock. That is a majestic tower. You don't see it, do you, when
This is beautiful.
you're on the top of the thing?
No.
You can't see the wood for the trees, so to speak. Can't see the stone for the spire. You know, there's not much that's left in Coventry, but just to look down there and get a sense of what surrounded this church and why all these densely packed buildings were so ready to go up in flames.
Yeah.
The intensity of the heat must have been appalling. But one of the things that brought the church down was in the 1890s, I think it was, there's some steel repairs to the timber beams.
Right.
And when you heat steel, of course, it twists and bends.
Oh, yeah.
And it's that pulled the walls in and made it collapse. So ironically, the strengthening ended up being
Being its
the
downfall.
weakening factor, yeah.
The cathedral at Coventry was the only one in England to be destroyed during the war, and it forced the church authorities into a difficult decision. Did they simply rebuild the old cathedral in all its medieval glory, or should they leave the ruins alone to stand as a memorial to those who had died and as a poignant reminder of the pain and destruction caused by war?
I think it's great that they left it here, actually.
Yeah, I think if it had been rebuilt, if these walls had been strengthened, the glass been put back in, a roof had been put back on. There's one way of doing it, of course, after the war.
But you lose the history, don't you?
You lose the
What
history.
building's gone through.
Yeah, and I guess you could argue it's a sense of denial that it happened
Yeah.
in the first place, whereas this seems to accept what happened as fact. And the new cathedral is built to say something, to give you the next chapter in the story of Coventry.
Yeah.
Quite powerful that way, I think.
At first, the church authorities decided to build a new Gothic cathedral adjacent to the ruins. But this idea drew critics, including the then Bishop of Coventry, so rather than force it through, they held a competition that was open to any architect. How many competition submissions were there?
There was something like 219 submissions that came from all over the world. The favoured approach generally from the competition was to build a new cathedral parallel to the existing ruins.
Okay, show me some of the entries.
There was an entry by Peter and Alison Smithson, who were very well-known architects at the time, who proposed a very contemporary solution, which was a building totally within the ruins and incorporating the tower with a sweeping roof.
That's quite dynamic. It's
is.
almost like an airport design. It's got that
It is. It is.
Sense of flight about it.
It was very well received by the architectural press of the time, and some thought it should have won.
Some of these designs strike me as a bit eccentric.
They are. There was one that was totally underground, where the architect was worried about nuclear attack and protecting the cathedral.
That one?
Which is exactly that, yes.
Gosh, underground bunker of a cathedral. It's cathedral as bomb shelter. It's not really a symbol of hope, is it?
No, it's not.
But nestled within the weird and wonderful submissions was a brilliantly modern design from little-known Scottish architect Basil Spence. What was distinctive then about Spence's design?
Spence was the only one of the competition entries that kept the ruins as their entirety and linked it to a new building. The others removed a wall, the south wall or the north wall, and added the cathedral, still maintaining the space, but all of theirs linked in one way or another to the ruins as they stand, which meant an alteration to the ruins. So that was the major difference.
After receiving praise for the spirit and imagination of his design, Spence was chosen as the winner, and for him it was the realization of a long-held dream. Several years earlier, whilst fighting on the beaches of Normandy, a fellow soldier asked him what his ambition was. Spence replied simply, to build a cathedral. The cathedral ruins were extremely important to the people of Coventry, who held regular open-air services here. So Spence's decision to keep them in their entirety was hugely popular. He believed the new cathedral should grow out of the old, and the ruins would remain as a symbol of remembrance for the fate of the city. If the ruins offered remembrance, then Spence was determined that his new cathedral would represent hope. And past and future are literally linked by a connecting wall between Old St. Michael's and the porch of the new cathedral, the setting for my next climb. I'm going to scale 70 feet to see how Spence managed to reconcile two buildings built 500 years apart.
I think a lot of school kids get brought to Coventry. I was brought here when I was
Yeah, I was too.
but a teenager. I think I was about 11 or 12. You came as well.
I was first year of school, secondary school, yeah. Right, let's get jamming.
The west entrance is dominated by the immense plate glass window, but as we climb, Lucy notices another of the cathedral's most striking features.
So what do you think of this canopy then, Dr. Foyle?
Well, I think it's a clever idea because you've got the roofless ruins of the old cathedral, and then you've got the fully vaulted and roofed new cathedral,
Yeah.
quite dark and enclosed.
Yeah.
And so I guess this is a transition between them. It's a clever bridge, I think, between the two things.
I'm not sure I like it, actually.
You don't?
No. I don't know, I just feel it almost overshadows the old cathedral.
Yeah. Whether that sort of slightly cranky, typically 50s, 60s form might look equally at home in a bus shelter or a cathedral.
That might be what's sort of taking it away for me a little bit. I like the idea, but the effect, 5 out of 10.
Do you know, I can see you turning to architecture after this. You're going to have to retrain, take you 7 years.
Yeah, I'll just take 7 years out of my life.
One of Spence's chief concerns was to ensure a sense of continuity between the two cathedrals. One of the ways he achieved this was through his choice of building material.
Climbing up to this level, you feel you're in a canyon of this pink stone. It's quite remarkable how the old cathedral meshes with the new one just by virtue of this material. And it's a deliberate choice by Spence. He was fed up in the 50s of what he called glass boxes and cubes. Quite the fashion then, not entirely disappeared today. And his fellow architects were a bit dismissive of his choice of Hollington, the local stone, which provided the original stone for much of Coventry's medieval buildings. It really harmonises well. Well, you can see some of the glass boxes that Spence talked about in the 50s.
Yeah.
The kind of fairly cheap solution to rebuilding a city when, frankly, the country was more or less bankrupt. But hey, you kind of totally hated glass. Look at that, there's about 4 acres of it.
Yeah.
The defining feature of this entrance has to be the huge expanse of engraved plate glass known as the West Screen. It's a beautiful reimagining of a traditional cathedral entrance with religious figures and saints high up looking down on the worshippers as they enter the cathedral to give thanks to God.
Shall we zip across? Is that the word?
Well, this is a Tyrolean. Technically, it's called a Tyrolean.
So shall we Tyrrell across?
Should we do a little Tyrrell?
Let's get Tyrrellised, shall we?
Spence initially approached world-renowned glass sculptor John Hutton in 1952, but it took 9 years until the windows were fully realised. Hutton spent the intervening time experimenting and inventing new methods for glass engraving, which resulted in these incredibly beautiful, translucent figures.
And they're so big as well. They must be about 8 foot high or something.
Something like that, aren't they? They're superhuman in scale.
Yeah.
But they're so busy, the way in which these great trumpets are being blown and these characters spiralling through space. There are 66 figures in all.
Wow.
And you've got the Virgin, look, in the middle. And there's Christ. So there's saints and angels swirling around. A real celestial vision.
We've also got an amazing view, a reflection of the old one as well.
Now that's clever, isn't it?
It's lovely.
It acts like a kind of mirror. You never get away from the idea of this ruin and resurrection. It's clever, that. So Lou, what do you think of them?
I actually quite like it. I can appreciate the artistry, that's for sure. I don't think I would have done when I came here as an 11-year-old, but I like it.
I think there's something convincing about trying not to make angels and so on look too human, because then you just end up thinking, well, how do the wings fix to your back? You know? So to turn them into these dynamic lines, I think, is because it's all about energy and emotional power after all, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
I think it's totally appropriate. I like them too.
Should we head down?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it.
Upon entering the cathedral, it may appear like a huge, well-proportioned aircraft hangar, a vast, empty room with plain concrete walls, a functional space. But the more you look around, the more the traditional elements begin to reveal themselves. Inside the cathedral you see the basic elements of a great English church. A big nave, its long central vessel separated from its aisles by tall columns reaching up to a vault. And it's a long view too, in the way that medieval churches were long, focused on the altar housed in its separate space called the chancel. So it is, more or less, a traditional design. On the other hand, it contains some unusual features. To walk into a medieval cathedral, you'd expect to see rows of stained glass windows. In fact, here you just see solid panels of wall. And then medieval columns, rows on big bases right up to the roof. Well, here, they're not on bases at all, a little bit of bronze. They seem to be upside down as they taper outwards as they grow, and they support unusually slender-looking rib vaults. These are made from concrete and somehow span in a very airy and delicate way with wood between. Now, all this novelty meant that traditionalists were outraged, but Spence argued that true tradition lay in responding to the opportunities of your own age, much as the builders of Durham or Lincoln had done in making their contribution to architectural evolution. That's what he saw as true authenticity. Even the traditional stained glass window was given a thoroughly contemporary reworking by Basil Spence. For my next climb, I'm going to scale this 80-foot-high window to explore the detail that's impossible to appreciate from the ground.
This area is called the Baptistry.
Yeah, I was wondering what this piece of rock was.
Yeah, it's a font from a chunk of rock from Bethlehem.
Oh, wow.
And it was brought by people of different kinds of faiths,
Okay.
you know, free. They provided transport across Europe for it.
Wow.
And so to bring a bit of rock from the Holy Land.
That's amazing.
It's marvellously primitive too, isn't it? It's
I like
not sculpted into any particular image or symbol, apart from a scallop shell on the top.
It hasn't been sort of finished off too precisely.
You're a fan of it then?
I am. I have to admit, I do like lumps of rock.
Taking 4 years to complete, the baptistry window contains 198 individual hand-painted glass panels. These panels are abstract in design. They don't portray any immediately recognizable figures or scenes. Spence was more concerned with creating a mood than biblical storytelling, and these panes shine down on the nave floor, creating an astounding pattern of glowing color. In keeping with the cathedral's message of hope and resurrection, the overriding motif is of the sun glowing benevolently upon those being baptized.
So the big impression for me at this height is that every one of these panels is its own work of art.
Yeah, completely individual.
Yeah, because from a distance it becomes part of a big colour scheme, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You've got the red, the earthy colours. You know, reds and browns and blues and greens. It looks like fire and elements and things. And then there's that extraordinary sun-like yellow, white in the middle.
Yeah.
And then blue, celestial blue above.
It's beautiful.
I like the fact that there's no right or wrong. There's no squinting to see the name of a saint and a little label underneath them.
God, you could look at it for hours, couldn't you?
The beautiful, intricate glasswork is the creation of John Piper and Patrick Rainchins. But the surrounding stonework is Spence's own creation, and he made a conscious decision to offset the glass with a very simple, almost industrial framework.
Spence said that medieval builders created their windows with hand and chisel and hammer, the stuff that was available to them, and so the finely carved mouldings are a result of their technology. Now in the 20th century, you know, he's got great stone saws and so on. It's all industrial, machine-made stuff. So he's respecting the age in which he's creating this.
Yeah.
And I rather like the fact that it is mechanistic and precise in the outline, and all of the attention is given onto this stained glass. It's got such soul and atmosphere.
Yeah.
I like the contrast between the two blues. It's like a big bath, isn't it?
It's beautiful.
And so there's the scallop shell. Gosh, look at that. It looks like a pebble now.
It does.
You know, now we're up here, Lou. Completely changed my mind about what I think the blue looks like or stands for. Yeah. Because I thought it was quite celestial, you know, this heavenly blue.
Yeah.
But all these ripples across it, totally aquatic. Because, of course, the whole thing is a baptistry, isn't it? So it's all about water and immersion, and truth comes through water.
Yeah.
Talk about immersive. Absorbed in this thing, in this colour. Exactly. I think it's so rare that you experience pure colour and light like this.
This is incredible.
You see why throughout time the stained glass windows never really lost admirers. You just can't beat it for sheer opulence.
The stained glass isn't the only place where Spence reworked and modernised a traditional feature of a cathedral. The concrete and vaulted ceiling at Coventry has echoes of the great ribbed vaults of cathedrals like Durham and Lincoln, but there's a big difference. Conventional Gothic vaults spring from the walls as integral parts of a great skeletal structure. Not so in this case. Here, the vaulting is totally separate from the roof, serving no structural function. I'm going to get above the vaulted ceiling and beneath the roof to get a better view.
Medieval stone vaults are incredibly heavy, and their weight is transferred, often via buttresses, through the walls and down to the ground. But Spence's concept of a vault was totally different. This weighs very little because it's purely ornamental. It doesn't even touch the sides of the buildings. It's only fixed at both of the long ends. Now, to create this latticed network of concrete, he had the help of the most gifted engineer of his generation. That was Ove Arup. And Arup suggested that the columns, 60 feet high, should carry mushrooms over them. So if you imagine that there is an umbrella-like structure, so that the whole thing is self-supporting. It's a very, very clever solution and one of the best examples of mid-20th century engineering. That meant that the roof could perform its own function quite independently. So these reinforced concrete trusses hold 29,000 square feet of copper and take care of themselves.
While Spence's vision for the rebirth of the cathedral delighted and intrigued most, not all of his ideas met with universal approval. I'm making my way across the roof of the cathedral to see one of its most contentious features. That is an 80-foot-high bronze flesh designed by the cathedral's engineers Arup as a modern take on the city's medieval steeples, but it wasn't universally popular. When Spence was giving his fundraising lectures explaining that you can find such things on French cathedrals, a lady stepped forward and said she found objectionable what seemed to be a design for a radio mast. The waggish Spence replied, "Well, we can't leave it out, madam. It's to receive messages from heaven." Television may have been in its infancy, but the church authorities knew a good PR stunt when they saw one. The world was wowed when, rather than simply carry the flesh up to the roof, they borrowed an RAF helicopter to lower the 80-foot spirelet into place. It announced the rebirth of Coventry Cathedral was complete. And it's from the roof that we can see another very unusual feature of the cathedral. Unlike the straight walls of most churches, here they're zigzagged. The inspiration for this striking feature came from a somewhat unorthodox source. Spence worked day and night over the designs for the cathedral and ran himself down. At one point, he had an abscess on his gum, and his dentist gave him a local anaesthetic, which rendered him unconscious. The dentist was concerned, but when Spence came round, he told him he'd had a dream. He'd walked through his cathedral and turned around at the altar and saw that the walls of the nave were zigzagged, and it's that that gave him the inspiration. The dentist suggested he might charge him for the idea. And what these zigzag walls enable is one of the most beautiful wonders of the cathedral. As we've seen, from the entrance, the nave seems like a concrete box. But when you look from the altar at the other end of the church, the cathedral reveals itself as a riot of glorious colour. Each pair of these stained glass windows portrays one of the 5 ages of man, from birth to death, and they combine to create a magnificent golden glow upon the high altar. Sitting upon this simple concrete slab is another symbol of Coventry's rebirth and a link from past to future. The Holy Cross, which surrounds nails reclaimed from the wreckage of the original cathedral. And above this hangs the majestic 74 feet high tapestry of Christ, which is the setting for my final climb.
He's an imposing character, isn't he?
As always.
I guess it's only right.
Yeah.
But to get up to this tapestry and face that really dominating figure,
Yeah.
it's going to be quite extraordinary. Visited a tapestry exhibition and saw some works by the artist. And he thought that if he'd won the commission for Coventry Cathedral, he'd like Sutherland to create a tapestry for it. But he, at first, imagined a large east window in this space. And then he had a masterstroke that the tapestry, if it filled the wall, could be the dominant image in the entire church. If so, it would be the largest tapestry of its date in the world. And that's just what happened.
This magnificent rendition of Christ and the story of his birth, death and resurrection mirrors the experience of the city of Coventry. And looking back down the nave, you understand how all the elements of this magnificent cathedral combine to tell this central story.
The way he was portrayed in the glass was, of course, as a child, wasn't it? Sitting in the Virgin's knee.
Yeah.
But look at him, I mean, full grown, bearded.
Yeah.
It's like his own life has been shown in progression through the cathedral. And when you look back, of course, you see the ages of man in the windows behind you. So the whole thing.
That really is incredible,
Yeah,
seeing it from here.
The whole way in which the cathedral talks about the passage of life and the idea of resurrection, birth, death, renewal and so on, it's very powerful. It all adds up, I think.
Yeah.
The French company responsible for crafting this tapestry used traditional techniques. It took 12 expert weavers over 2.5 years to create it, on a loom that was over 500 years old.
Mesmerizing.
I just can't get over how this was made. It just, it's a wonder of needlecraft.
Looms in every sense, I think.
It's amazing.
Apparently 1,000 different colours of wool.
Really?
Yeah.
You can sort of see that though when you're close up, the shades, and it really does just look like a painting, doesn't it?
Doesn't it?
They must have had to use an aircraft hangar to make it in or something. I just cannot get over the size of it. It's really incredible.
Coventry Cathedral manages to do something remarkable. It manages a balancing act and yet retains its own very strong character. The old cathedral is left alone, respected as a monument to what the people of Coventry went through. Next to it is this building, which is very much of its age. It uses technology which is pioneering. And you know, this vision, this incredibly well thought through, this well crafted monument to hope and renewal after World War II is not just for people of one faith, although it speaks strongly for that faith. The point is reconciliation. And so from the stone of the font through to the carving of the glass, it's people of different faiths and nations who've all contributed to create this marvel of the 20th century.
Next time, how steel, glass and concrete translated the lessons of the past into a vision for the future at the Lloyd's Building in London.
And Climbing Great Buildings continues here on BBC HD on Monday at the same time. There's quizzing later this evening with QI at 8:30. And coming up next, it's The One Show.